basketball arced through the air, a perfect, silent parabola that ended with the satisfying snap of the net. For a single, suspended moment, the gymnasium held its breath. Then the silence shattered, replaced by a roar that shook the bleachers. His teammates mobbed him, shouting his name, their praise a chaotic chorus in his ears. Ethan, panting, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, felt a familiar, clean towel drape over his head. He scrubbed at his face, the soft cotton a welcome relief, before a cold bottle of Gatorade was pressed into his hand. He didn't need to look to know it was Caleb. Caleb was a constant, a quiet shadow that followed the bright blaze of Ethan's high school stardom. While Ethan commanded the court, Caleb occupied a solitary seat in the stands, a silent sentinel waiting for the final buzzer. He was the one who always had the towel, the water, the unspoken support. In their freshman year, a dozen hopefuls had tried to be the one to hand Ethan his post-game drink, but they had all learned. Ethan only ever took it from Caleb. Back in the fluorescent hum of their AP Calc class, the post-game adrenaline had faded to a dull thrum. A crisp sheet of paper sat on every desk, genetic designation screening. Ethan mumbled the words under his breath. Mrs. Davis, their teacher, tapped her microphone and announced that this Saturday, the entire junior class was scheduled for mandatory screening at St. Jude's Medical Center. The room, once sleepy with calculus, erupted into a hive of speculation. The screening was a rite of passage, the test that would sort them into the biological castes that would define the rest of their lives. Alpha, beta, or omega. Modern science had eliminated the drama of spontaneous designations, the messy, unpredictable heats and ruts that filled old novels. Now it was a scheduled, clinical affair. Still, the classroom buzzed with nervous energy. Someone wondered aloud what the odds were, concluding that most of them would be unremarkable betas. A lanky kid from the back row boasted that he felt like a total alpha. The inevitable question arose: who in their class was a surefire alpha? The consensus was immediate and unanimous: Ethan and Caleb. The topic held little interest for Ethan. His designation felt like a foregone conclusion. It wasn't arrogance. It was an objective assessment of the facts. He was an honor roll student, the captain of the basketball team, and could hold his own in any physical confrontation. Standing at 6'1" before his final growth spurt, the idea of him being anything other than an alpha was ludicrous. The same went for Caleb. He idly spun his pen, his gaze landing on his best friend. Caleb sat ramrod straight, his focus entirely on the worksheet before him, an invisible barrier separating him from the classroom's noise. His expression was placid, his skin pale and smooth under the harsh overhead lighting. He was simply solving equations, yet he looked like he'd been pulled from the poster of some teen drama. An absurd, unwelcome thought flickered through Ethan's mind. It would be utterly unacceptable if Caleb, with his quiet intensity, turned out to be an omega. Ethan shook his head, trying to dislodge the bizarre notion. Caleb was taller than him. An omega designation was impossible. A voice from the desk in front of him cut through his thoughts. It was Liam, his boisterous teammate. He wondered aloud what would happen if Ethan, the school's golden boy, was the one who ended up an omega. The class dissolved into laughter. Someone yelled that they could totally get behind that idea. Another joked that he'd have to be the most dominant omega in history. Ethan bristled, ready to shut it down with a sharp retort, but before he could speak, Caleb acted. The sharp crack of his textbook slamming shut silenced the room. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the gawking students, his voice low and cold as he asked if they were finished. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The crowd scattered. The brief unhappiness Ethan felt at being the butt of the joke vanished, replaced by amusement at Caleb's fiercely protective scowl. Acting faster than his brain, a reckless comment slipped out, a low murmur meant only for Caleb. He told his good brother that if he did become an omega, Caleb would be the first to know. On the sterile, quiet bus ride to the hospital that Saturday, Ethan tried to needle Caleb again, asking if he was ready for the good time he'd promised. He was met with a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. For some reason, the memory of Caleb's ears turning pink in the classroom made him fall silent. The screening itself was anticlimactic. A quick blood draw, a brief scan, and a nurse hustling them out to call the next name. The results would be delivered by email the following morning. When Ethan woke, the class group chat had already exploded with over 100 notifications. He scrolled through with a lazy grin, reading the verdicts. 3 girls in their grade, including the petite music rep, were alphas. Liam, whose grades were perpetually circling the drain, had also been designated alpha. A quiet, bookish boy from the debate team was now a confirmed omega. Ethan made a mental note to give him a wide berth. Only after he'd exhausted the gossip did he open his own email. He wasn't nervous. The outcome was certain. He scanned past the introductory text to the bolded letters at the center of the report. Ethan Carter, primary gender. Male, secondary designation. Omega. For a moment, the world swam. His screen seemed to blur. He reread the words, but they remained unchanged. A cold sweat prickled his skin. This had to be a joke. He scrolled down, his thumb trembling, and found a small, black-type addendum next to his abdominal scan results. Examiner notes indicate well-developed uterine anatomy. With a convulsive swipe, he exited the email and deleted it, as if the digital file itself were radioactive. He sat on the edge of his bed for what felt like hours, his mind a blank slate of shock. So what if he was an omega? He could still be himself. But the thought of admitting it, of telling anyone that Ethan Carter, the guy everyone looked up to, was an omega, felt like swallowing shards of glass. A knock at the door jolted him. It was Caleb, letting himself in with a key Ethan had given him years ago. He carried 2 plates of pasta, the aroma of garlic and tomato sauce filling the small apartment. Ethan's parents traveled constantly for work, and Caleb had long ago appointed himself as Ethan's weekend chef. His cooking was so good that Ethan had all but sworn off takeout. Caleb ate with a quiet grace that contrasted sharply with Ethan's ravenous consumption. But today, his friend's eyes were fixed on him. Caleb asked if his results had come in. The question was so sudden that Ethan nearly choked. A lie sprang to his lips, an almost reflexive defense. Of course, he said he was an alpha. He licked his upper lip, a nervous habit he couldn't control, his heart thudding. Caleb just hummed in acknowledgement, his long lashes shadowing his eyes. Just as Ethan started to breathe again, Caleb set down his fork. He asked Ethan if he could smell something, pointing out that it seemed to be coming from him. The only sound in the room was the frantic drumming of Ethan's own heart. A scent? Pheromones? His brain screeched to a halt. He could only watch, frozen, as Caleb rose and moved toward him. Caleb leaned down, his face close to Ethan's neck, and inhaled softly. The slight puff of air against his skin sent a jolt through him, making every muscle in his body clench. The alarm bells in his head were deafening. He nearly sprang away. Caleb pulled back, a ghost of a smile on his face. He said it was just the new fabric softener, reaching out to finger the collar of Ethan's t-shirt. He commented that it smelled nice. The relief was so intense it left Ethan lightheaded and furious. He shoved Caleb away with his elbow, muttering that he was crazy and had nearly given him a heart attack. He covered his own burning ear with his hand and tried to regain his composure, forcing a laugh. He joked that if Caleb liked the scent so much, he'd buy him a case so he could bathe in it. Caleb's smile widened. He had been more handsome than most girls since they were kids, and Ethan had always liked seeing him smile. But today, his attention was snagged on the warmth of Caleb's hand, which now rested on his shoulder, a heat that seemed to burn straight through his shirt. This couldn't continue. He had to put some distance between them. He was an omega. Caleb was an alpha. Even a child knew what that combination was designed for. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He needed a cold shower. He needed to think. Alienating Caleb wouldn't be easy. His friend, for all his cool aloofness, was deeply loyal and perceptive. A sudden cold shoulder would immediately raise suspicion. It had to be gradual. Ethan, a person of decisive action, formulated a plan. He began to subtly withdraw, making excuses to get out of their usual hangouts. Before their next game, he invented an errand, sending Caleb across town to retrieve a signed basketball he claimed he'd forgotten. The whistle blew. They won again, but it was a ragged victory. Ethan felt off, dizzy and easily winded. He leaned against the chain-link fence, wiping sweat from his eyes. Liam was the first to run up, asking if he was okay, noting he seemed out of sorts. Ethan waved him off, parched. He saw Liam holding a bottle of water and reached for it without thinking, telling him he was dying of thirst. He tilted his head back and drank nearly half of it in one go. When he lowered the bottle, he found Liam staring at him with a strange, intense look. Annoyed, Ethan tossed the bottle back at him and turned to leave, telling him not to let his idiocy be contagious. It was then that he saw him. Caleb was standing on the other side of the fence, the retrieved basketball slung over his shoulder. In his hands were a clean towel and a sports drink. He was just standing there, watching. Ethan felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Caleb's expression was unreadable, colder than he had ever seen it. Before Ethan could process what to do, Caleb moved. He walked past him with a frigid calm, straight to Liam. He snatched the half-empty water bottle from Liam's hand. When Liam reached to grab it back, Caleb shoved him, sending him stumbling. Then, with a flick of his wrist, Caleb threw the bottle in a perfect arc into a distant trash can. Liam cursed, his fist flying toward Caleb's face. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing Liam's wrist, his voice sharp as he demanded to know what was wrong with them. He pulled them apart, reminding them that fighting on school property was a one-way ticket to a suspension. Both boys backed down, though their faces were still thunderous. Caleb reached for Ethan, but Ethan, overcome by another wave of dizziness and a profound, bone-deep weariness, shook him off. He felt sick, truly sick. He mumbled that he needed to go home and left them both standing there, too exhausted to deal with the fallout. The taxi ride home was a blur of cold sweats. By the time he stumbled into his apartment, he was shivering. He fumbled through the medicine cabinet, found a bottle of aspirin, and swallowed a pill without checking the dosage. The world was spinning. He collapsed onto his bed and fell into a feverish sleep. He was woken by a gentle hand on his shoulder and a soft voice calling his childhood nickname. He opened his eyes to see Caleb, wearing an apron, sitting by his bed. Even through his illness, Ethan felt a flash of irritation at being woken, but he dutifully ate the vegetable and shrimp porridge Caleb had prepared. Caleb's concern was palpable. He asked why Ethan hadn't told him he was sick, explaining that he had rushed back as soon as he heard Ethan had taken a leave of absence from practice. Ethan didn't have the energy to argue. He slept until noon the next day but still felt listless. Through a haze of fatigue, he remembered his plan to distance himself. He told Caleb to just leave the bowl and go home, that he'd wash it himself. He closed his eyes, slumping onto the sofa. When he opened them again, Caleb was standing over him, his expression grim. He cupped Ethan's chin, forcing him to meet his gaze. Caleb informed him, his voice dangerously quiet, that he was only letting this slide because Ethan was sick. He asked if it was fun, avoiding him for the past week. He knew Ethan hadn't been eating the food he cooked. He knew Ethan had been drinking water from other people just to spite him. Ethan, incensed by the accusation, shot back, his adrenaline overriding his sickness. What was wrong with drinking someone else's water? He wasn't Caleb's property. The argument was heated, the most they had spoken to each other in days. Ethan, buoyed by his status as the patient, felt he was winning, backing Caleb into a corner with his righteous indignation. But then Caleb's expression shifted. He said Ethan's name, his voice strange, and mentioned that there was a scent again. Ethan scoffed, thinking it was the same trick as before. But this time, Caleb's face was pale. He said it was real. Ethan smelled it too then. An overwhelmingly sweet fragrance, like honeysuckle in full bloom, pouring off his own body. It filled the room in seconds. Almost simultaneously, Caleb's face flushed a deep crimson. He dropped to one knee, his hands gripping the sofa cushions so tightly his knuckles turned white. Ethan's body went limp, a terrifying heat spreading through him from the inside out. He felt a primal panic as he instinctively tried to shrink into the corner of the sofa. Caleb's eyes, now a burning red, locked onto him. He looked like a predator that had just cornered its prey. A new scent joined the honeysuckle, a rich, intoxicating aroma of aged whiskey and cedarwood. It was coming from Caleb. He was being pulled into a rut. Fear, sharp and cold, pierced through the feverish haze. Caleb started to crawl toward him. A sob broke from Ethan's throat as he begged Caleb not to touch him, threatening to end their friendship. But Caleb was already there, pulling him into a tight embrace, his body trembling with a terrible restraint. Ethan felt a sharp pain in his neck, and then the fever, the stress, and the fear finally consumed him, dragging him down into darkness. He sat up with a gasp, the starched sheets of a hospital bed scratching his skin. He saw Caleb sitting in a chair by the window, and a fresh wave of fury and violation washed over him. He shouted, demanding to know how Caleb dared to bite his neck. Before Caleb could answer, the door opened and a woman in a white coat walked in. A doctor. Nurses followed, expertly pushing him back down and beginning a series of examinations. The doctor, taking a chart from Caleb, scanned it briefly. She remarked that the inhibitor had been administered just in time to prevent a disaster. She looked at Caleb with admiration, asking if he was the boyfriend from bed 309, commending him on his responsibility and quick thinking. Then her gaze fell on Ethan, and her expression hardened. She berated him for his carelessness, for not taking his designation seriously. She informed him that if his partner hadn't acted so quickly, he might already be pregnant. Ethan's face burned. Partner? What was she talking about? He guiltily touched the back of his neck and found the skin was smooth. No mark. Just a tiny puncture from an injector. Caleb hadn't marked him. He had saved him. The doctor, however, was not finished. She demanded to know what could have caused such a severe premature heat. Shamefaced, Ethan mumbled about the aspirin. The doctor laughed, a harsh, humorless sound, and launched into a lecture about the dangers of taking random medication during a designation period. Finally, Caleb intervened, rescuing him from the tirade. As the doctor was leaving, she paused to give Caleb some final advice, reminding him to be diligent with inhibitors and scent patches now that he and the little O were together. She poked her head back in one last time with a not to do bad things. Ethan wrapped himself in the blanket like a mummy and pretended to be dead. He could feel Caleb poking him, first his head, then his waist. After a long silence, he couldn't stand it anymore. He threw back the covers and was met with Caleb's smiling eyes. An awkward silence settled between them. Ethan knew he couldn't hide his designation from Caleb anymore. He laid out his one condition. Caleb was not allowed to tell anyone he was an Omega. Caleb, back to his usual quiet and agreeable self, simply nodded. The tension eased, and Ethan's mind began to clear. He asked Caleb, an alpha, how he had an Omega inhibitor on him. The only logical conclusion was that Caleb was secretly seeing an Omega. The bitterness of betrayal stung him.